So now we're going to be talking about common commands that you can do in the command line. As you can see here, I am SSH'd into the server already, and if I could type in fact, pwd, you'll see that I'm in my home directory. If I type in ls, which we talked about in the last video, you'll see that there's a listing of a lot of files and directories. Now, I want to create a new directory in this case. So the command to do that is, well, we want to make a directory. So it is mkdir. And in this case, we're going to be playing around with the text of the Wizard of Oz. Why? Why not, basically. So I'm going to make a directory called Oz, O-Z. Once I do that, if I type in ls again, you'll see that there is a directory that did not exist before, OZ. Now, before we go too much further, let's say that you didn't want that directory and you want to get rid of it. The official command to remove a directory is rmdir, remove directory, space Oz. And I can run it, and if I type in ls, you see that it is no longer there anymore. If I make it again, it's back. I should mention that you can also use another command, rm, which is just remove, to remove the directory, but it doesn't always behave as you would expect, especially if there are files in the directory. So generally speaking, it's safer to use rmdir for removing a directory. If we go into the directory itself, so we're going to do cd oz, and of course pwd, just so you can see for sure that where we are. We see when I type in ls, it's empty. There's nothing in there. ls-l will also show that there are 0 files. So we need to get a file to download, and I said we're going to play with the text of the Wizard of Oz. So how do we get that? Well, if we look in a browser, there's a site called Project Gutenberg, or gutenberg.org, and that is where they basically have the text of a lot of not open source, but public domain books. And I just search for the Wizard of Oz, or actually the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and it has a lot of different types of downloads that I can do here. And in fact, in some cases, they will have even audio books, audio versions of the books. For this one, I'm looking at the plain text UTF-8 download. And if I click on it, you'll see that it's just the text of the book. Here's the chapters. Here's where it starts. Well, I'm going to copy this URL. And now let's go back to the command line here. And I'm going to use a command called wget. So it's wget, and now I need to paste in that URL. I hit enter. It tells me a lot of stuff, but basically it says that it downloaded the file, and it's called pg43936.txt. And again, if I type in ls, you will see it there, or ls-l, and you can see that I just downloaded it, and that is the file size. So that's great. We've got a copy of the Wizard of Oz. How can we look at it? There's a couple of different commands that we can use. The first one is cat. It's short for concatenate, or basically concatenate means to put together. In programming, for some reason, they like using the word concatenate a lot. But cat, and if I type in the PG, and of course I don't want to type in all those numbers, so I just hit tab and use the tab completion to do the rest of the file. But when I hit enter, what it's going to do is it's going to dump the contents of that file out to the screen. And it's a long file. But okay, so we saw it all. But it went by too fast. If I scroll up, you'll see that it's all there. And in fact, the last words, and here is Toto 2. Anyway, okay. But if we want to be able to look at it and see the words a little better, there's two commands. One is called less and one is called more. I'll show them both to you. So the more command, M-O-R-E, is and again PG, the name of the file, it shows the file a page at a time, so to speak. And as I hit the space bar, or it goes through a page at a time. And I can hit Q to exit, which I just did. The less command moves a little less at a time. That is, so less PG, and I'm hitting tab again, and I can move through one line at a time using my arrow keys, or I could use the page down and page up to move through as well. And some people prefer the more command, some people prefer the less command. The main thing is that you realize using either cat, if it's a short file, or more or less, you can look at the contents of a file without having to go through the trouble of opening it in an editor. And it's actually a really handy thing when you're working in the command line to just be able to quickly open a file or see the contents of it without having to go through the trouble of an IDE. Let's talk about a couple other things that we can do. If we type in ls, or excuse me, ls-l, there you can see the file. I want to create a copy of this file. Maybe I want to mess with it, change the contents, something like that. How do I do that? There's a copy command. And of course, what you may have been figuring out is that in Linux, actually began with the Unix systems, the programmers were lazy, as all good programmers are, and so they came up with very short commands. And so if remove was rm, copy of course is going to be cp, and it takes two different arguments. The first one is, what do I want to copy? And I want to copy the pg.txt. And the second is, what do I want to copy it to? And in this case, I'm going to create a file called oz. Why not? If I do ls-l, you'll see now that there is a file called oz and a file called pg43936.txt. Now, if you've been working with computers a long time, you may say, but wait, don't you need the .txt ending? And the answer is no, you don't. It's common in Windows systems, but on Linux-based systems and Unix-based systems, you don't need a file ending. It doesn't have to have a .txt. In fact, if I type in less oz, it contains the exact same information. Or if I opened it up in a text editor, it would treat it exactly the same, because a file just contains text. File names can have a dot in them or not. Or I could, in fact, rename oz to something else. So the command to rename something is actually, they use the idea of moving the file. So it's mv. So I'm going to move oz to something else. oz period. Why not? And if I type in ls-l, you'll see now that the file's name is oz period. Or I could call it move oz period to dot oz, so period oz. And again, you notice, oh, it's actually, it's a good thing I did this one. You notice it's not showing up, and that's because it is considered to be hidden when it starts with a period. How do I show it when it's hidden? ls-a. And I'll do the -al because I still like the long listing. And so here is the .oz, so it's still there. You notice also, for that matter, it has two listings here, a single dot and the double dot, which we mentioned in a previous video. The single dot is referring to the current directory, so this is information about the current directory, and the double dot is information about the parent directory. But the main thing here that I want you to see is that the dot doesn't really matter in terms of if it's allowed in a file name or not. It is. And if the file name starts with a dot, those are generally considered to be hidden files. And then again, how do I rename a file? That's the mv command. So I can copy a file using cp, I can move a file or rename it with mv. And so let's do a couple other things. I'm in the, if I type in pwd, I'm in the oz subdirectory. Let's make another subdirectory. Let's mkdir temp, just because. If I now say mv, let's do the .oz. Actually, I want to get rid of the dot at the beginning, so I'm just moving .oz to oz, so renaming it. And I made my directory temp. If I do my ls-l, you'll see that there's the subdirectory called temp, and that I've got my file oz. From there, what I want to do is I want to mv the oz file to temp, to temp. Okay, when I hit enter, what happened, you would say, no wait, isn't mv supposed to rename it? Yes, but it's a smart command. It says, oh, temp already exists and it is a directory. So oz was moved into the directory without changing its name. So if I cd into temp, and again, pwd lets you see the entire path. I'm in oz/temp, and ls-l, you'll see that there is indeed a file by the name of oz there. Let's go back to the oz directory, and again, pwd lets you see that I'm in the oz directory. If I try to rmdir temp, it won't let me because it's not empty. So there's a couple different ways of going about it. The safest thing is to remove the file first, rm, and then I can say temp/oz. Now notice I don't have to go into the temp directory to remove the file inside of it. I can just directly type in temp/oz. And I hit enter, and that file is gone. But this is actually a really, really important point. There is no undo in the command line. I can't hit Control-Z. I can't right click and say undo like you can in a lot of the other GUIs. In Linux, if you say delete that file, remove that file, it is gone. And that means if you've worked all night on your homework and then accidentally say rm that file, you've lost all of your work. And yes, it's happened to all of us. So be very, very careful. There is no undo in the command line. But with these commands, oh, by the way, I should say now that we have ls-l, we removed that oz file, I can now rmdir temp. Now I'm not going to retype it, I just want to show you that you can also use the up and down arrow keys to see all of the previous commands that you've typed. So I can go up to rmdir temp and hit enter, and it executes that command. Now ls-l shows that temp is now gone and I only have the original file. So with these commands, you can see how you can start viewing files, manipulating them. We haven't talked yet about editing files, that is the contents of files. That's going to be, it's significant enough, we'll put it in another video. But to move them around, to delete them, and again, just a word of warning, the command line is supposed to be for people who know what you're doing. But of course, we're all just starting out, and we don't quite know what we're doing yet. We're learning. But because of that, this is sort of a computer environment without training wheels. So just be careful. Like I said, and I'll say it again, I'll say it in classes and such as that, there is no undo in the command line. So be careful when you're moving things. Also, I should also mention, let's say you have ls-l, and I had shown this command earlier, touch, that just creates an empty file. So I'm going to touch a bunch of files. Let's call it, since we're using oz, oz1, oz2, oz3, oz4, and now ls-l, you'll see that there's these 4 files beginning with oz. If I try to move them into something that doesn't exist, for example, if I mv oz1 into temp, thinking that there's a temp directory, it changes the file name to temp instead of oz1. Okay, let's change that back. Mv temp to oz1. if I want to show you one other thing first, and that is there's also something called the star. That is, well, it's a wildcard operator. If I ls and a star, that means show me everything in this directory. If I ls o star, that means show me only the things starting with O, and then the star means anything else can follow it. And I could even be more interesting. Well, I'd have to make a bunch of other files. I don't want to at the moment. But you can use these with other commands such as copy and cat. So, for example, if I were to say mv oz, actually, let me do one thing first. I'm going to make a directory called temp, which I've already done. Now I can move all of the oz star, that's oz1, oz2, oz3, oz4. I can move all of those into temp in one command. And ls-l shows that they're no longer in this directory, but if I go into temp and do ls-l, you'll see that those exist here. If I want to move them back to the original directory, mv oz star and then two dots meaning the previous directory. And now you see that there's nothing in the directory. I can go back. So we're going to start off with these tips. I'm also going to be including a link in the description that has a lot more things that you can do with the command line, just like the star for expanding out different names and targeting different files. There's a lot of other little tricks that you can do in order to make it a little bit more streamlined to interact with the command line, and I'll be putting that link in the description, so be sure to check that out. And having said that, we'll be moving on in the next video to more command line tools such as arguments and flags and the man command. So see you then.